diagnosed with Asperger's?
I do believe it was sometime around November of 2013.
Okay. Okay. And also reading in the petition, it said that Taylor had identified that Mrs. Gore knew what Asperger's was.
Yeah, that was interesting because, and this comes from his mother's timeline that she kept and submitted, that when she went to the school people and advised them that there was a diagnosis of Asperger's, and then she brought this up in a conversation that Taylor was involved in, he said that he knew what Asperger's was because it had been discussed in Mrs. Gore's classroom. Mm-hmm. So the light bulb that goes off with me is that Mrs. Gore must know something about Asperger's or she wouldn't have been discussing it with the class.
Right.
And yet the signs, the symptoms, the diagnostic criteria that ultimately are used by the professionals in making the diagnosis, some of those had to be observed by her and certainly were relayed to her by the mother. And yet, you know, the mother was told, there's nothing we can do, you'll have to work through this, you'll have to find your own help somewhere else. Essentially, we have a way we're doing this, and if he doesn't do it our way, well then he must not be a gifted student or you must be having problems at home.
Did the Tenbrinks ever reach out for help with Taylor's academic?
They reached out for help to all the appropriate places that you would go to first, which would be the school. They go to the, you know, when he started at the middle school in the 7th grade last, you know, August, September, he immediately started having problems there too. And again, they placed him in their gifted and talented or accelerated learning program, but he was already having problems right at the very beginning of the school year. So she went to the vice principal, Mr. Reynolds, and got nowhere, and was essentially told that he's not going to qualify for any kind of help because he's smart. He's above grade level in all of his classes, and so there's nothing we can do to help you. And she reached a total dead end at the school level from the vice principal. So then she went to Shari Taylor, the gifted and talented coordinator for the district, and met with pretty much the same brick wall, that he probably has behavioral problems. I believe Ms. Taylor told her that her own son takes karate, and that's a good way for her child to learn behavior modification. Maybe she should consider putting Taylor in karate. That was her solution.
Wow.
But at that point, right then and there, is the child find trigger. Instead of referring the parent to karate, the parent should have been referred to the special education department for an evaluation.
Right. Wow. So that brings me to the school psychologist. I believe it's Scott Turin for, is it Vista Heights Middle School? At this time, so he's now in 7th grade in middle school. The school psychologist is there. Surely he would know, right? He could recognize Asperger's or have a one-on-one conversation to have a determination of where Taylor's at.
You would think so.
No. Okay. Is there no record of that then?
Well, again, Mr. Trin, the school psychologist, received the same input from the parents, providing information about their observations and telling him that they believed that this child was in crisis. Those were the words that Robin used with Mr. Reynolds, the vice principal. So Mr. Trin, the school psychologist, had all the same information that everybody else had, but he did not make any referral for an evaluation, and we don't really even see Mr. Trin coming into this until after the evaluation process was begun at the parents' demand.
Okay, so was an IEP asked for? And what is an IEP?
Well, an IEP is an individualized education plan. And when a student has an IEP, it means that they are in special education. Okay. And it means that everything about their educational process can be altered or modified to fit their own specific needs, whether that's curriculum modification, the way the classes are conducted, whether the child goes into a mainstream class or has to have a one-on-one teaching availability for specific coursework, whether they have a teacher's aide or additional tutoring. Whatever that child needs that fits that child's specific needs is done in an IEP, in a plan. And that plan is put down in writing with very specific issues are outlined, diagnoses, issues, and then a plan is developed for a specific way of educating that child, so that child receives the free and appropriate public education, FAPE, which is also part of the law. And so each IEP really has to be different because it's individual, and that wasn't done in this case until the parents demanded it in writing.
Okay. And is an IEP the same as a 504? What's the difference?
Vastly different.
Okay.
Any student can qualify for a 504. It comes under a different section of the law. And a 504 is simply an accommodation. So if a child has a hearing problem or a vision problem, they might be sat in the front of the classroom where they can hear better or see the chalkboard better. Or maybe the child does have a problem, but it's not interfering in a great way in their education, but it's interfering in a small enough way that it can be resolved or assisted through minor accommodations. But those accommodations are not going to include any type of changes in curriculum or coursework or mainstream classes or providing a certified special education teacher to supervise or instruct. They're not going to include a lot of the things that you would get in an IEP because they are just simply accommodations and they're not an individualized plan.
Okay. Okay. What qualifications does a child need to meet an IEP?
Doc?
Oh, well.
Tell us about the three-prong test.
Three-prong.
The one that Alpine District insists that Taylor doesn't meet.
Well, they have to qualify under certain categories. For example, OHI, which is other health impaired, SLD, which is specific learning disability. What are some of the others? Those are the only ones that we were concerned about. So it's not enough that somebody comes in with a diagnosis, but that diagnosis also, let's say it's, in this case, it was Asperger's, depression, and anxiety disorders. So they were aware of the diagnoses, but those diagnoses also have to affect what is going on in the classroom. So if they can't see any type of effect that's going on in the classroom, it doesn't matter. He simply doesn't qualify. And so how a child with Asperger's, severe anxiety, and severe depression has all these issues at home and then comes to school, and per their reports, he's just symptomatic free and perfect, brings up some issues from us.